Damn it! The word cracked out of Damian Sterling's mouth and vanished into the white roar of the Montana morning. The wind didn't care that he was a billionaire. It didn't care about his calendar or the $2.4 billion acquisition waiting in Denver or the six-figure watch ticking uselessly on his wrist. The wind simply pushed harder, tearing snow sideways across the two-lane road where his obsidian Rolls Royce hunched like a fallen animal. The rear tire was flat, murdered. A black crumpled grin in the ice. Damien's breath stung his lungs. He had gloves. They were thin, soft leather, designed for steering wheels and valet counters, not for metal wrenches in a hard freeze. He held his phone high, as if prayer might grant him a bar of reception. No service. He lowered the useless rectangle and stared at the emergency kit in the trunk, like it was a museum exhibit. Jack, lug wrench, a fluorescent triangle no one ever used. I built sterling capital out of vapor and nerve, he muttered. I can change a tire. He could not. The wrench slipped. He fell. Snow soaked the knees of his charcoal trousers, bled into his socks, found the seams in those Italian shoes he had once bragged were weatherproof. The lug nut didn't move. Not a whisper. The sky was a seamless bruise of gray. Pine silhouettes leaned like eavesdropping giants. The road was empty in every direction, as if the world had decided to stop and let the storm finish its sentence. He checked his watch, 7:58 a.m., and did the math he'd done 3 times already. If he were on the interstate, if the tire weren't flat, if the weather weren't biblical, if. He laughed once, short and sharp. If was a rich man's fairy tale. A sound reached him then, threadbare and bright, the unlikely music of laughter. He rose, turned, narrowed his eyes against the flung snow. 3 shapes condensed out of the white. Boys on bicycles, black coats ghosted with frost, faces red from the cold and fearless with youth. Their tires carved quick, serpentine lines through the drift. They did not look like angels. They looked like kids who had some place to be and no one to drive them there. The tallest braked first, boots skidding, a torn red parka flapping like a flag. "That's a Rolls, right?" he asked, awed but casual, like he was identifying a rare bird. The smallest, drowning inside a mustard yellow coat, 2 sizes too big, whistled. "Looks like a spaceship." The third boy, slender, thoughtful, fogged glasses, held together with a neat line of tape, studied the listing rear end. "You're not going anywhere on that." "You don't say," Damien replied, more bitter than he intended. The tall one stuck out a hand. "I'm Kadeem Brooks. This is Theo Price." He nodded toward the glasses. "And Zion Carter. You need help?" Damien stared, baffled by where they'd come from, and more baffled by the question itself. People did not ask him if he needed help. They asked what he needed from them. There was a difference. Yes, he admitted. "If you know how." Kadeem grinned, like a coach hearing a timid maybe turn into a yes. "Man, we live on this road. Zion Triangle. Theo, Jack. Sir, what's your name?" "Damien." "Mr. Damien, pop the trunk all the way. We'll get you moving." They moved with the quick confidence of kids raised by necessity. Zion jogged the reflective triangle 20 paces back, set it firm, and returned with his face on fire from the wind, smiling. Theo slid the jack under the right point on the frame, feeling for steel by instinct, not by diagram. Kadeem braced his shoulder against the car for stability and passed Damien the lug wrench, not to use but to hold, to make him part of the scene instead of the problem. "Gloves?" Damien asked, already knowing the answer. Kadeem flexed fingers that were raw and fiercely alive. "Lost mine last week. I'll be all right." He nodded to the wrench in Damien's hands. "We loosen in a star pattern. Don't fight the nut. Breathe with it. Breathe with it." Damien wanted to laugh at the poetry of a teenage boy telling a billionaire how to breathe, but he didn't. He watched. He learned. He handed Theo a towel from the trunk before being asked. He held the flashlight on his phone, though the screen still shouted, "No service." Its light a small act of contrition. Kadeem planted the wrench on the first stubborn hex and leaned. It gave a fraction, the kind of victory that feels like an earthquake if you've already failed twice. He twisted, eased, moved to the opposite lug, and repeated the rhythm. Theo pumped the jack with a steady piston stroke. Zion stood at the ready, small and serious. "Why are you out here?" Damien asked, embarrassed at the tremor in his own voice. Mrs. Vargas's front steps are a skating rink, Theo said. We shovel before school so she doesn't fall. She's 83. In this? Damien gestured at the roaring air. In this, Kadim echoed, not unkindly. You want to stop a storm, Mr. Damien? Or you want to work around it? They had the flat off in minutes. The spare rose into place like it belonged. Because it did. Because someone finally knew how to introduce it. Theo aligned the holes with surgeon care. Zion, warm breath, plume after plume, offered the nuts as if they were rings in a ceremony. Kadim set them, crossed, tightened. It's not about muscle, he said conversationally. It's about order. Damien swallowed. Order. Something he thought he owned. The rolls settled on 4 good feet again. Elegant, ready. The whole operation had taken 18 minutes. 18 minutes to translate humiliation into gratitude. 18 minutes to steal a billionaire from the jaws of his own schedule. You saved my morning, he said, and meant more than the words could hold. He reached for his wallet, fingers stiff with cold and habit, peeled back a fan of hundreds, and offered 5. Please, take it. Kadim's eyes flicked to the money, then to Damien's face. The snow filled the silence like static. No, sir, the boy said softly. We can't. Damien blinked. The idea of refusal felt like a joke in a language he didn't speak. This is $500. Theo pushed up his tape-mended frames and smiled, embarrassed for Damien, not for himself. We didn't stop for money. But why? The word escaped Damien, hoarse. Why wouldn't you? Kadim's voice gentled. Because of my dad, James Brooks. He taught me that if you help for cash, it's a job. If you help for nothing, it's a bond. And bonds hold when money burns. The storm hushed for one thin second, as if the sky wanted to hear this too. Zion spoke, small and sure. Mr. James helped everybody. He fixed cars at midnight. He carried groceries when our neighbors' backs hurt. When he got sick, the town brought us food for months. People we didn't even know. Kadim nodded, jaw tight against the wind and something deeper. He passed last spring. We promised him we'd keep helping. That was the last thing he asked. Don't turn kindness into a receipt. Damien looked down at the green paper in his hand as if it had turned mid-snowfall into a stone. Something in his chest, calcified over years of deals and dinners where every laugh cost someone something, cracked. Then let me do something else, he said, groping for a shape to this new feeling. Coffee, breakfast, anything. Theo smiled for real this time. We really do have to go save Mrs. Vargas from her steps. Kadim set the wrench back in the trunk, exact as a mechanic placing a favorite tool. He extended his hand again, not for money, but for contact. Damien took it. The boy's palm was cold and honest. You'll be fine now, Kadim said, but go slow. The shoulder's slick where we packed it down. Zion lifted his bike, slapping snow from the chain guard. Bye, Mr. Damien. So, wait, Damien called, sudden panic blooming at the thought of losing them to the white. What's your address? Kadim shook his head, almost amused. Pine Hollow, end of Juniper Lane, last house before the fence, but you don't need to bring anything. They were already mounting their bikes, already angle cutting into the storm, already laughing again because boys laugh in weather like this when they're together and doing something that matters. Their taillights were faint red commas in the paragraph of snow. Then they were gone. Damien stood with the billfold still open, his hand slowly lowering until it touched the suede line of the door. He put the money away, not because he couldn't spend it, but because he finally understood it was the wrong language for this conversation. Inside the car, the heater blew. Leather warmed. The engine hummed its cultivated purr. Damien didn't put the car in drive. He sat with his hands on the wheel and listened to the echo of Kadim's father in 3 borrowed voices. If you help for nothing, it's a bond. He saw, with a clarity that hurt, a table of stone-faced men in Denver whose handshakes were contracts, not connections. He saw an apartment in Manhattan so quiet at night he sometimes turned the television on for company and then muted it, pretending he liked the flicker. On the passenger sill, where Zion had braced a mittenless hand, there was a smear of black grease in the shape of a crescent moon. Damien touched it, left it there. He pulled onto the road like a man stepping onto a new floor, gentle, uncertain, careful to feel each inch. The storm eased a shade, the way you can't tell if someone has stopped crying or only moved their face against the pillow. He drove like he was learning how to again. And maybe he was. Maybe he had learned how to go for years without ever learning why. By the time he hit the interstate, his phone finally found a tower and exploded with demands. Assistant, lawyers, investors, the competitor who would feast on his absence. Damien let it ring. He drove through the throat of the storm with a grease crescent on his door and a sentence lodged in his ribs. Don't turn kindness into a receipt. He made Denver with minutes to spare. He signed his name where the tabs told him to. He said all the right things, at the right volume, with the right smile. He stood at the window of a 47th floor conference room and watched the city shiver under the same weather that had stranded him, and he wondered how many people were spinning lug nuts alone. When the final pen cap clicked, when congratulations frothed and then thinned, when the celebratory lunch plan was floated like a parade balloon and tied to his wrist, Damien cut the string. Send me the countersigned packet, he told the lawyers. I have somewhere I need to be. Where? His assistant asked, startled. He surprised himself by telling the truth. Juniper Lane. The drive back north felt different, though the sky hadn't bothered to notice. He took the exit for the town the boys named, Pine Hollow, and found a main street that time loved, if money didn't. A diner with a red and white sign that had lost its sheen but not its pride. A hardware store with a bell that rang like news when the door opened. A mechanic's bay with the overhead door half up, salt furring the corners of last summer's paint. He bought 3 pairs of insulated gloves, 2 wool hats, 1 bright yellow for Zion because maybe he liked that color, and then he made himself stop. The point wasn't shopping, the point was showing up. The houses on Juniper Lane sat close to the road the way old houses do when land was cheap but lumber wasn't. He passed a chain-link fence spangled with ice and turned into the last driveway where a blue mailbox leaned forward as if eager to hear secrets. The Brooks place was small and stubborn. Fresh shovel lines scalloped the walk. A red sled leaned against the rail. There was a basketball hoop over the garage, net a little unraveling. Damien parked the Rolls at the curb. No need to announce himself louder than the car already did, and walked up through the hush of snow. The door opened before he knocked. Kadeem stood there in a dry sweatshirt now, steam of warm house behind him, surprise widening his eyes. Theo and Zion appeared over his shoulders in that instant, like commas after a name. You really came, Zion said, making it sound like the end of a fairy tale, and the beginning of a different one. Damien lifted his hands empty. I told you I didn't bring anything. Kadeem stared at the man who had arrived in a car you only ever see on a calendar, now standing on their cracked concrete with his hat hair and his unlearned humility. Come in, the boy said. You look cold. Inside smelled like cinnamon toast and laundry. A photograph of a man in a work shirt, James Brooks, watched from the mantel with a smile as stubborn as the house itself. A woman in her 40s with tired eyes brightened by a welcome, wiped her hands on a dish towel and introduced herself as Angela. She did not blink at the stranger's name. Small towns learn people by deeds before headlines. You boys help Mr. Sterling? She asked. Mr. Damien, Zion corrected gently. We did, Kadeem said. Angela's smile turned soft with a pain that doesn't fade. It just fits better. James would have liked that. Damien's throat tightened. He looked at the photograph again, at the hands that had known both wrench and blessing. He measured himself for the first time against a man he'd never met. I came to say thank you, he said simply, and to ask, is there anything your family needs? Anything your town needs? Theo and Zion both looked at Kadeem. This was his house, his call. Kadeem glanced toward the back window, where the yard showed a crooked shed, and beyond it, a low brick building in the distance, with a roof that sagged in the middle like a tired back. The community center needs a roof, he said at last, and heat that doesn't gasp like a smoker, and computers that don't run on fumes, and a playground that won't split a kid's shin open. But Mrs. Vargas needs her steps shoveled today. Damien nodded. feeling the shape of a different ledger forming in his head. One measured not in IRR and burn rate, but in footsteps and warm radiators, and the soft clatter of library books sliding into small hands. Then we start with Mrs. Vargas, he said. Kadim's mouth opened, then closed, forming something like a laugh and a prayer in the same breath. You're serious. As a flat tire in a blizzard. 10 minutes later, four figures, one in a billionaire's peacoat, three in boys' jackets that now included two pairs of new gloves and one ridiculous yellow hat, were out in the weather again. Snow made everybody the same height. Shovel, scrape, salt, repeat. Damien's shoulders burned. His breath fogged out in honest human proof that he was there, that he was useful. Mrs. Vargas cried anyway. Some people do when the cavalry turns out to be children and a man who has just remembered how to be a neighbor. By the time they finished, the storm had softened from command to suggestion. They walked back down Juniper Lane in a row that made Angela look out the window and put a hand to her mouth, the way mothers do when they see kindness walking their street. At the curb, Damien paused. I have to go make a few calls, he said. And there's somewhere I want you to take me tomorrow. Where? Theo asked. Damien pointed past the yards toward the low brick building with its slumped roof and brave sign. There. Kadim followed his finger, then looked back at Damien with a measuring squint that came straight from the photograph on the mantel. We can show you, he said, but don't bring a camera. Bring time. Damien smiled like a man who'd just been told the rules of a game he finally wanted to play. Deal. He slid into the Rolls, the grease crescent still on the sill, the heater humming, the engine ready. When he pulled away from Juniper Lane, his windshield framed a town that looked the same as it had an hour ago, and nothing like it had an hour ago. The difference was not the snow. It was him. That night, in a hotel that was more mattress than magic, Damien stared at the ceiling and drafted a list. It was not the kind of list his assistants made. No columns, no color coding, no acronyms. It was a list of promises: roof, heat, books, computers, meals, coats, a van, jobs for the parents who needed them, training for those who wanted more, scholarships to fling open doors that never should have been closed. He added one more line, last and first. Don't turn kindness into a receipt. Turn it into a road. Outside, the blizzard spent itself. Like anger, remembering it can become quiet. Inside, a man who had learned how to acquire realized he could learn how to repair. He did not know yet what it would cost him. He only knew it would be worth more. And somewhere on Juniper Lane, a mother kissed her fingers and pressed them to a picture frame. Did you see that, James? She whispered into a house that kept warm by habit and faith. Your boy kept his promise. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow a Rolls Royce is going to stop on Juniper Lane, and this town will never be the same. At 8:07 a.m., Juniper Lane sounded like any other winter morning in Pine Hollow. A shovel scraping a porch, a dog barking 2 yards over, the careful hush of people trying not to wake the late sleepers. Kitchen light glowed in square windows. Breath fogged in front of scarves. Frost drew ferns on glass. Then the Rolls Royce turned the corner. It moved like a black comet through breath and frost, tires whispering over the powder, chrome catching the weak sun and throwing it back in small, defiant signatures. It didn't belong to any sound Pine Hollow knew. It didn't belong to any map Pine Hollow had ever studied. It belonged to elsewhere, and now it was here, easing to a stop in front of the last mailbox before the fence. Inside, Angela Brooks lifted her head, butter knife halfway through a slice of toast. She had learned not to startle when life threw odd shadows across her family. She had learned to watch first. Kadim, she called, eyes still on the window. What did you do? He came running from the hall, one sleeve half inside his hoodie. Theo and Zion zipped behind him like commas on a good sentence. Is that? Theo began. It's him, Zion finished, already grinning. It's Mr. Damien. They reached the door at the same time. Kadim stopped them with a palm, not to keep them safe from the car, but to keep them safe from what a car can mean. Remember, he said, low but firm, the way his father used to set a rule that doubled as a blessing. We don't need anything but time. They nodded. The door opened. The outside stepped in. Cold, clean, bright. And so did Damien Sterling, shoulders hunched against the temperature, hair flattened on one side like he'd argued with a pillow and lost. He carried nothing. Even the gesture was loud. "Good morning," he said, and it came out shy, which made Angela decide, again and officially, not to fear this man. I brought coffee." He turned, revealing a cardboard carrier on the Rolls trunk. 4 steaming cups, each wearing a domed lid like a little helmet. Zion took a cup and whispered, as if to himself, "That smell is what heaven probably puts in the vents." They went inside. The house closed around them with its usual warmth, the radiator's small ticking, a radio too quiet to hear the words, cinnamon and toast and detergent. Damien wiped his shoes without being told. He set the cups on the table and folded the empty carrier in half, like a man accustomed to cleaning up the edges of his own gestures. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted, eyes flicking to the photo on the mantel. James Brooks, square-handed and smiling from a day that still warmed this room. "I kept making lists." "What kind of lists?" Angela asked, masking curiosity with hospitality by setting a plate of toast in the center. "The kind I've never made," he said. "Not budgets, not quarterly targets. Promises." Kadeem watched him the way a referee watches a boxing ring, alert to intent, not spectacle. "And we already have one for this morning. You said you wanted to see the community center." "I did." He turned to Angela. "If you're okay with me stealing your son for an hour." Angela blew on her coffee and hid a smile in the steam. "If he's back by algebra." "We'll go now," Kadeem said, and the words came with a jolt of leader's cadence he hadn't planned. He pulled his gloves on, new ones, and didn't mention them. They stepped back into the morning. The neighborhood watched without staring. Pine Hollow knew the difference. Curtains breathed. A neighbor waved with the precise angle of someone choosing not to gawk. Mrs. Vargas cracked her door and gave them all a saint's nod, the kind you save for people who save you first. Zion cupped his hands around his eyes and leaned into the Rolls glass like a museum visitor. "It still looks like a spaceship." Damien clicked the passenger door open for Kadeem and startled when the boy shook his head. "We'll walk," Kadeem said. "Walk?" Damien repeated, as if the physics of it had changed overnight. "You wanted to see Pine Hollow," Theo said, adjusting the tape on his frames out of habit more than need. Damien had a feeling those centimeters of tape would stay until the glasses earned retirement on their own. You can't see a town from behind that kind of glass. The 4 of them began the slow, squeak-snow trek to the center. The Rolls idled for a handful of seconds, then went quiet, as if the car understood and approved of being parked where it couldn't teach anybody anything. They passed the hardware store. Mr. Whalen raised a mitten the size of a roast and tapped his chest twice, a signal that meant, in Pine Hollow, "I see you. I've got you." They passed Rosie's diner. Betty made a rectangle with thumbs and forefingers, then pointed at Damien like a director picking a shot. "You owe me a picture with those boys on that car." He nodded, already imagining the photo on a wall that smelled like fryer oil and home. They turned a corner, and there it was. Pine Hollow Youth and Community Center. The sign's paint flaked like tired skin. The building's brick slouched from too many winters. Tarps sagged on a portion of the roof, tied down with ropes that had accepted a long fight. The ramp wobble was visible from the sidewalk. A kid's mitten, lost weeks ago, fossilized into the chain link like a frozen flag. "Welcome," Kadeem said, not unkindly. "This is where glue tries to be enough." Damien stood and took a breath that bit a little. "Who runs it?" "Ms. Imani Reeves," Theo answered. "She's the director, the nurse, the counselor, the coach, the auntie, and the person who knows every kid's shoe size." As if summoned by her own resume, the front door swung open, and a woman in a knit cap and fingerless gloves stepped out, holding a clipboard like a shield and a sword. Her eyes didn't flinch at the billionaire on the sidewalk. They took the boys' faces first, counted them like priceless inventory, and only then turned to the stranger. "You must be Mr. Sterling," she said. "Pine Hollow's gossip chain runs faster than our internet." "Damien, please." He extended a hand. "You must be Ms. Reeves." "Imani," she corrected, shaking with a grip that meant business and kept people from breaking. "You're the one who followed 3 kids into a blizzard instead of a boardroom." He opened his mouth to parry, found no defense worth saying, and settled for a small bow of acknowledgement. "Come on in, then," she said. "Say hello to the only heating system you can see." Inside smelled like bleach and crayons and hope. The heat came from 3 orange glowing space heaters placed with the strategic terror of someone who knows exactly how far the fire code can bend without snapping. Kids wore coats at tables, pencils moving, lips sounding out words in a reading circle, a chess game halfway to checkmate under a poster that said, "Be kind, be brave, be you" in letters that had been patched with tape twice. A drip line dimpled a bucket in the corner. Someone had drawn a smiley face on the bucket in Sharpie and written, "Tip jar." The effect was both funny and unreasonable. Imani walked them through the rooms the way a firefighter walks a reporter through a burned kitchen. Honest, a tiny bit embarrassed, and completely unashamed of the people who kept cooking anyway. The computer lab screens warmed slowly, fans whirring like old sighs. The library had a patchwork of titles. A new diary of a wimpy kid because some anonymous angel mailed it last month. A math workbook from 1999 because no one had thrown it away yet. The gym had a single good ball and a hoop with a net that made an almost sound. "Kids still show up," Imani said as they stood in the doorway that looked like last autumn. "They show up because this is where the grown-ups always are. Some of their lives are a special kind of chaos. We are the opposite of that on purpose." Damien lifted his gaze to the ceiling, at the water-brown fan of plaster. He imagined it coming down on a Thursday at 4:12 with second graders underneath. His stomach tightened. "What would it take," he asked, "to make this place what it's supposed to be?" Imani's smile tilted. "Everything. Let's start a list," he said. "Roof, heating, electrical, plumbing, flooring, computers, books, kitchen, playground, van, coats, boots, gloves, teacher stipends, counseling, after-school meals." He said it too fast. Rich man fast, solution man fast. Imani didn't bristle. She just put a palm up the way traffic cops without cars persuade 18-wheelers to stop. "Slow," she said. "We accept help. We don't accept saviors." It didn't sting. It steadied. He nodded. "Okay, slow." Kadeem spoke into the new temperature of the room. "Ms. Reeves, he's serious." "I know," she said. "So am I." Damien took the clipboard she offered. It was a spreadsheet, hand-drawn, the kind that happens when grants require attachments and printers refuse to be reliable. Line items wore neat checkboxes. A column titled Cost held numbers that weren't guesses. A column titled We Tried listed every fundraiser, every letter, every weekend fix-it day that had pushed the building ahead by an inch and the years by a mile. He read every line. He didn't rush. Beside him, Theo and Zion stood quiet, their straight spines and mirrored stillness saying more than advice could. Kadeem watched the lines of Damien's face shift the way tides do when the moon moves. Invisible, but unmistakable. "I want to fund this," Damien said at last. "All of it. And I want to be very clear about something before you tell me I don't understand limits." He looked from Imani to Angela's boys and back again. "I'm not asking to name anything. I'm asking to fix everything." Imani's chin lifted a degree. "No plaques? Maybe one," he said, surprising himself. "With a name that isn't mine." Kadeem understood before anyone else did. "My dad." "If you'd allow it," Damien said to him, and then to Imani. "James Brooks Memorial Hall, if that feels right for you, for the kids." Silence reached a hand into the space between them and pressed on a bruise that had made this building brave for a year. Imani's mouth trembled around a laugh she didn't want to cry with. "Feels right to me," she said. "Feels right to the town." Zion's eyes had gone glossy. Theo made a business of adjusting his frames again, because sometimes you have to tidy something small when your heart is making a mess. Damien took a breath that felt like a step into a cold creek. "But there's a condition." Imani's eyebrow went up. Kadeem's jaw went set. "Not for you," Damien added quickly. "For me. I'm not wiring funds and vanishing. I'm moving here for a while. I'll be on a ladder. I'll carry drywall. I'll be early and stay late. You'll tell me when I'm in the way and I'll learn how not to be." Imani let the silence sit again, this time as a chair they could all take for a test. Finally, she nodded. "Then we'll teach you how to be useful." Someone shrieked in the gym, the good kind that means a ball finally went where it was supposed to go. Three little ones zipped past the doorway, boots squeaking, hats still on, joy like steam off a hot dish in winter. First steps? Amani asked back to Captain. Before the roof? Before the grant writers? Before the donor letters? Safety, Damien said. We don't open this main room again until the ceiling stops threatening children. We relocate to a temporary space by noon today. Imani snorted. And you'll conjure a heated auditorium out of thin air. Kadim nudged Damien with an elbow that said, "Welcome to the league where boasts must be true." Damien smiled like a man allowed to use an old skill for a new reason. "I'll call Pastor Ellis at the community church, and Mr. Whalen, and the school superintendent, and anyone else who answers on the first ring because they know your name." Imani's face shifted a fraction at the inclusion she hadn't had to demand. "Make your calls," she said. "I'll start packing the art closet." They moved. It wasn't a montage with inspirational strings. It was Pine Hollow's usual miracle. Ordinary people doing ordinary things fast enough, together enough, to feel like cinema by dinner. Imani made a list out loud and people wrote it with their feet. Theo and Zion carried boxes with a concentration of bomb squad texts. Kadim taped lids like a pro and labeled in block letters, library, games, math, lost and found. Please check. Damien stood by the office door saying, "Yes, Pastor, yes, we'll cover the heating bill. Yes, I'll have a donation on your desk by nightfall. Thank you, thank you. Yes, I'll send a truck." By 11:40, the church basement smelled like possibility and dust. Long tables marched in rows. The youth room down the hall surrendered couches. The kitchen traded crock pots for kid-sized trays. Someone brought a string of paper snowflakes to make the white walls warmer because it was January and hope has a shape you can hang. At 12:05, the boys walked back to Juniper Lane with Damien. They didn't feel like escorts anymore. They felt like partners walking a cosigner home. The neighborhood rhythm changed as they turned the corner. People on porches. Heads at windows. A half circle of neighbors gathered like a spontaneous town hall. And parked at the curb, silent and shimmering in the cold, was a second Rolls Royce. The first belonged to Damien. The second bore a ribbon. Not a bow, not a wedding-style exuberance. Just a clean white band that said for you without shouting. Angela stepped outside, hands still damp from a sink that knew her by first name. She took in the car, the ribbon, the boy at her side, the billionaire who suddenly looked smaller because he understood the size of what he was about to do. "I told you," she said gently to Kadim without taking her eyes off Damien. "We don't need anything." He shook his head quickly. "Mama, he said different. He said the condition was for him." Damien spoke to the circle, but he aimed his words at one woman and three boys. "This isn't a gift you can't refuse. It's a loan. One I'm begging you to take so I can do what needs to be done faster." There's a kind of attention only small towns can give. A silence that feels like soft hands keeping your sentence from falling over. He had that now. "I can wire money," he said. "I did that all morning. Crews are on their way. But in the hours between now and the day the roof stops leaking, I need to move people, supplies, meals, kids. Your family's minivan died last month," he said to Angela, not guessing, knowing because Imani told him, because he had asked the right question. "This car has 4 heated seats, winter tires, and a trunk that will hold enough groceries to feed a basketball team. Use it for the center. Use it for Mrs. Vargas. Use it for you when the bus is late and your shift isn't." He swallowed. The ribbon on chrome blurred for a second the way stars do when eyes refuse to lie. "I will buy a sensible 10-year-old van tomorrow," he added, the corners of his mouth finally remembering humor. "This is a bridge, not a billboard." Laughter, small, grateful, rolled through the circle. The spell didn't break. It became something sturdier. Angela folded her arms the way you do when you gather yourself. "What's the payment schedule?" she asked, Bronx-born steel under Montana kindness. He smiled. "First payment, tell me where it needs to go. Second, let me ride along and carry bags. Third, when the van arrives, hand me back the keys without a thank you, because the work was the thank you." She looked to her son, the boy who had refused $500 in a storm, the boy who stood now like a hinge between what was and what might be. Kadim turned the equation in his head the way his father had turned carburetors, gently until they decided to cooperate. "We accept," he said. "On those terms, applause because Pine Hollow claps when something is decided well." Mr. Whalen whooped once, sharp, like a referee confirming a three-pointer at the buzzer. Mrs. Vargas cried again, this time under a knit cap that said blessed with glitter that had learned how to be dignified. Zion circled the car twice and then stopped dead. "Mama," he said loudly enough for the block, "we got butt warmers." If there had been doubt left, it fled with the laughter that followed. Damien handed Angela the key fob like a man handing over a small animal that can run fast if you hold it wrong. She took it. It looked like science fiction in her palm. She pressed the button. The car blinked. Neighbors cheered. Theo touched the door, then snatched his hand back as if it might bite, then put it on again on purpose, because brave is a muscle too. "Look at me," Angela said softly to Damien when the noise rode down. He did. "You're not buying us," she said. "You're joining us." "I know," he said. And he did. The day didn't change color because of the car. Pine Hollow doesn't give trinkets that power. What changed was tempo. By Tuesday Wasser, Angela had driven 3 trips to the church with boxes labeled library and math, and a final one that said coats because Kadim had remembered the box under the stairs. By 3:30, Zion and Theo had learned how to fold the back seats down so the long tables slid in without scraping. By 4:10, a new group chat existed in which Ms. Reeves simply typed, "Needs 6 bags of rice by 5, and 2 minutes later, 3 people replied, "On it." At 5:12, a ceiling tile dropped in the old center into an empty room. Nobody heard it. Pine Hollow was busy being elsewhere, like it had planned the whole time. That evening, with the church humming and the first makeshift dinner service moving like a line dance, Imani on ladle, Mr. Whalen on tray wipes, Damien at the door with a box of donated hats, Kadim found a corner near the bulletin board and sat. He let his back slide down the wall until his knees made tense, and his breath fogged and faded and returned. Theo and Zion flanked him without needing to ask permission to share ground. "Are we doing the right thing?" Theo asked to the ceiling, because ceilings carry questions fine. "We're doing something," Kadim said, "and Mr. Damien is doing it our way." Zion tipped his head toward the kitchen, where Damien laughed at something a third grader said and actually listened to the second sentence the child spoke. "He's weird," Zion concluded affectionately. "Yeah," Kadim said, "but the good kind." A shadow crossed their knees. Amani crouched, joints cracking like punctuation. "I've seen a lot of people show up for their own reflection," she said, voice pitched low enough that only their triangle heard. "He didn't even ask where the camera should go." "Betty's got that covered," Zion said cheerfully. "She's making him pose with the car next to the pie case." Amani grinned, then sobered. "I need to ask you boys something." They sat up straighter. "Tomorrow morning, the first crew arrives. Roofers, electricians, a plumber who swears he can make our pipes sing. Damien wants you 3 to be the tour guides. Every soft spot, every window that sticks, every outlet that sparks if you look at it wrong. You willing?" Kadim's yes was the kind of yes that plants a post and runs rope from it. Theo nodded. Zion saluted with 2 fingers because serious moments sometimes require ceremonial silliness. "Good," Amani said, patting the air like she was smoothing a blanket over a story. "Then get some sleep. Tomorrow Pine Hollow decides to become new." They did sleep, eventually. After returning the church to shapes that made sense. After walking Juniper Lane with the kind of tired that feels like a medal. After letting Angela put hands on hair and cheeks because mothers count survival out loud. Near midnight, the lane was quiet again. The Rolls purred once when the motion light caught a fox. Frost wrote its soft script on the hoods of both cars. The second key fob slept in a ceramic bowl by the front door next to a tangle of lanyards and a single bent screwdriver of James Brooks's that no one would ever throw away. In the small hours, Damien woke in his motel room to a silence not found in cities. He stared at a ceiling with a water stain shaped like a map he couldn't place. He reached for his phone, found emails he would not answer, bored messages he could not let write his next page. He opened a blank note and wrote 5 words. Don't turn kindness into theater. Then he added a sixth. Build. Tomorrow. Contractors arrive. Budgets meet blueprints. And the first nail driven into rotten wood sounds like a drum for the whole town. Also, the boys discover the one problem money can't solve, and why that might be where their father's legacy matters most. By mid-morning, the sky had gone the color of tin, and the wind pushed snow into little dunes along Pine Hollow's Main Street. The church basement buzzed the way only a room full of worried neighbors can buzz. Low, constant, like a beehive deciding whether to swarm. The anonymous complaint had hit the county inbox at dawn and then pinballed through phones before breakfast. Do not let outsiders change the color of this town. 16 words, no signature. Enough to force the county to pause non-emergency work and seek public comment before issuing the final batch of permits. Imani taped the printed notice to the church door, then printed 3 more because she knew how rumors breed in the gaps between facts. At 10:00 a.m., the folding chairs were full. Boots dripped meltwater, coats hung off chairbacks. The front table held a chipped gavel that Pastor Ellis had borrowed from the PTA, a pot of bad coffee, and a stack of blank comment cards that no one was going to use because Pine Hollow preferred to speak with mouths, not pens. Damien stood near the wall, hands in pockets, jaw quiet. He'd promised himself 2 things. He wouldn't be the first to talk, and he wouldn't talk long. Imani opened the meeting with the tone of a referee who loves the game and refuses to let it get ugly. Thanks for coming. I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm here to explain what's already happening, what must happen next, and how we'll do it so Pine Hollow still looks like Pine Hollow when the dust settles. Mr. Whalen from the hardware store thumped a palm on his knee. Here, here. The county inspector, Halverson in the green coat, binder like a shield, took the floor first by rule. The building needs a new roof, structural reinforcement, a modern HVAC system, electrical rework, lead-safe paint abatement, and plumbing upgrades. None of this is optional. It's safety and code, not cosmetics, she said, scanning the room. Work began under temporary emergency authorization because of a collapsed ceiling risk. To continue at full pace, I need to hear that you understand what's being done and how. A hand rose in the second row. Mr. Pike, a snowplow driver, with a voice like gravel. We understand the work. We don't understand the Rolls Royce. Scattered chuckles. Damien kept his face still. Fair, Imani said. We'll get to the car, but first, the plan. She turned a whiteboard toward the room. It wasn't fancy. Checked boxes, dates, and words in block letters. Roof, beams, heat, electric, plumbing, lid safe, paint, library, lab, kitchen, playground, van. Next to each was a contractor's name and a projected week. Beside that, a column labeled local read like a roster. Whalen's, Rosie's Diner, Pine Hollow Lumber, Pastor Ellis's Volunteers, the school shop class. We buy local where local can deliver. When we can't, we bring it in and train local to maintain it, Imani said. We document costs on this board every Friday. If you want to argue line items, come with a pencil. A woman near the back lifted 2 fingers. Mrs. Vargas, scarf tight, eyes kind. What color paint? Cream walls, forest green trim, Imani answered. Same palette, not the same rot. That got a laugh that took the temperature down 2 degrees. Halverson nodded. Now about the complaint itself, she said. Anonymity is allowed, but claims must be concrete. Outsiders changing color is not a code issue. If the concern is cultural or financial control, that's for you all to decide in a forum like this. If the concern is environmental safety or process, that's on me. I've reviewed the files, the permits are clean. Shorty, she stepped aside. Eyes pivoted to Damien whether he wanted them or not. He walked to the front without taking the room. I'm Damien, he said simply. I drove into your storm, and 3 boys, Kadeem, Theo, and Zion, pulled me out. I offered them cash. They said no. They gave me something better. A reason to stay. He glanced at the boys in the front row. Zion, new yellow knit cap, sat up taller. Theo pushed his repaired but still taped glasses. Kadeem did not fidget at all. I'm funding the work. I'm also swinging a hammer, Damien continued. I don't want my name on the front. I asked to put one name inside, James Brooks. If that feels wrong, say so. If it feels right, say so louder. I'll be here either way. A hand shot up before he could step back. Mrs. Kellner, who ran the antique shop and didn't miss much. What keeps you from walking away when the glow fades? Nothing but my word, he said. That's why I moved into the Pine Motel and turned off my New York phone. If I leave, you'll see it before a reporter ever will. I also set up a separate foundation with a local advisory board that isn't me. Who sits on it? Mr. Pike again. Imani, Pastor Ellis, Mr. Whalen, a teacher from the elementary school, Ms. Diaz if she'll accept, a parent representative, and if he's willing, James's brother Joe. All 5 heads turned to Joe Brooks at once. He stood with the slow dignity of a man who's carried more than he drops. I'll serve, he said, on one condition of my own. Meetings are open, minutes are public, plain words, no jargon. Done, Damien said. A teenager in a varsity jacket raised a hand halfway and then all the way. Nate, who sometimes pretended he didn't come to the center because the 6th graders were watching. Can we get a skate pad on the far lot next to the playground? I know it's not urgent, he shrugged, but urgent things kept pushing out every fun thing lately. The room tilted toward him. A father in a worn Carhartt muttered, "Kid's not wrong." Imani leaned into the moment. We do urgent first. We don't forget joy. Urgent keeps you alive. Joy makes it worth it. Pastor Ellis tapped the gavel because the room had quietly turned into a church anyway. We need to hear the downside plain. Who has a worry? A woman with silver hair and a librarian's posture stood. Miss Pembry. Property taxes, she said. When something gets nice, taxes go up. Imani nodded before Damien could. No property transfer here. No change of use. No tax hike triggered. We'll post the assessor's letter on the whiteboard. A man near the aisle kept his hands in his pockets, as if holding his words in there too. Earl Dennison, who had painted half the barns in the county. I'll say what that anonymous letter tried not to say, he murmured, throat rough. Some folks think outsider means stranger with money. Some folks mean stranger who ain't from around here. He swallowed. Oh, we're a small place. We protect the edges 'cause we've been cut. But I drove past the center Tuesday and saw my granddaughter doing homework in her coat. That ain't tradition. That's neglect. If the choice is cold pride or warm kids, I vote warm kids. It wasn't an applause line. It got applause anyway. Imani let it crest and ebb. Thank you, Mr. Dennison. Halverson cleared her throat, business returning. On process, I'm ready to issue permits with 2 conditions. 1. Weekly site walkthroughs open to the public, limited numbers, hard hats provided. 2. A youth apprenticeship track paired with the contractors, so this is not just a repair, but a classroom. If the board of the center approves and the advisory group signs, we proceed today. Approved, Imani said, without looking for a second. Rourke, the foreman with oak block hands, lifted a clipboard. I'll take 16s afternoons and Saturdays. They'll sand, paint, learn to set a jack and read a level. No show ponies. Real work, real pay. The varsity jacket shot up again. Nate's eyes sparked. Real pay. 15 an hour, Rourke said. Raises if you show up on time and don't put finished nails where framing nails go. Theo leaned toward Zion and whispered, We're gonna be rich, which made Zion whisper back, You already are. And somehow both were true. Damien stepped to the whiteboard with a thick marker. He wrote in big letters, Thursday, p.m., open walk. Sign up at Rosie's. Under it, he added, apprenticeships, C. Rourke, Imani. Then a third line. Budget posted Fridays. Argue with a pencil. A hand rose timidly near the back. Asha Patel, new to town, whose family had bought the defunct laundromat and coaxed it back to life last spring. I don't know the old ways here, she began, but I do know that when we fixed our dryers, 3 different men came by to help for free and wouldn't take money. It feels the same, only bigger. Angela Brooks stood then, palms flat on the back of the chair in front of her, as if steadying the whole row. My husband taught our son, you don't turn kindness into a receipt, she said. Today we're turning it into a ledger anyway, so we can see it, line by line, and make sure it works for all of us. She looked at Damien. You're not buying our town. You're joining our chores. That's the deal. That's the deal, Damien echoed. Pastor Ellis checked the clock. Unless someone wants to filibuster with a pie recipe, I'll ask for a voice indication. He smiled. All in favor of proceeding as laid out. Permits with conditions, public walkthroughs, youth apprenticeships, advisory board, posted budget. The room answered with a sound that wasn't quite aye and wasn't quite a cheer. It was communal assent, Pine Hollow style, a hum of yes that you feel in your boots. Opposed? Pastor asked. Because rules are rules. Silence except for a child somewhere in the hall who had found a set of keys to jingle into music. Gavel tap. Motion carries. The meeting dissolved into logistics because victory is never the last agenda item. People lined up to write names on apprenticeship slots and walk through lists. Mr. Whalen scribbled down measurements for shelves that would fit the new library plan. Ms. Pembry volunteered to pre-process donations so the library wouldn't drown in 100 copies of chicken soup for someone's soul. Mrs. Vargas slipped a wrapped loaf into Imani's hands and called it insurance against skipping lunch. At the edge of the bustle, Kadim found Damien. You kept it short, he said, impressed and amused. You did the heavy lift, Damien said. I just held a corner. Get used to it, Kadim said deadpan. Corners are where the weight hides. As if to prove the point, Rourke stuck his head in the door. We're burning daylight and the lumber's here. Who's ready to learn the difference between a sister joist and a headache? 10 hands shot up, teens, then a few fathers, then Ms. Diaz, the teacher, who'd shown up on her prep period and was still in a skirt and boots she would later curse. Imani handed out hard hats like party favors that actually mattered. Halverson hovered just long enough to see the first safety briefing begin, then nodded once and left to file her permits. Outside, the cold bit less because people warmed the air by moving. The lumber truck's tarp slid back with a clap. Pine boards gleamed pale as new bread under the gray sky. Damien took one end of a beam, Kadim the other. They moved in sync now without talking about it. At the church doors, Joe Brooks paused beside the new advisory board sign-up sheet. He wrote his name, slow, careful. Beneath it, he wrote the name that had begun to appear on plans and walls and lips like a benediction. James Brooks. He didn't add memorial. He didn't need to. By late afternoon, the roofline changed shape by inches that mattered. The first of the old lead-height paint was locked off behind plastic and negative air machines that hummed like calm. In the basement, the quiet cocoon had grown into a small constellation. 2 more nooks with egg cartons and quilts, and a tiny booklight that made shadows kind. News of the meeting, its tone and its vote, outran the complaint by sundown. Betty taped a handwritten sign in Rosie's window. Thank you for using your outside voices inside. Progress meeting Thursday 5 p.m. Beneath it, she'd drawn a Rolls Royce very badly and 3 stick-figure kids very well. Near dusk, Mr. Pike trundled past in his plow and slowed long enough to roll down his window. I still don't like that car, he hollered toward Damien. Me neither, Damien called back, surprising them both. The van gets here Monday. Mr. Pike barked a laugh and drove on. Inside the church, Imani's phone buzzed with a text from Halverson. Permits released, conditions attached, proud of your town. Imani showed it to Angela, who showed it to Kadim, who held it where Theo and Zion could read it together. 3 boys looked at a single screen and grinned at the same time. For once, a notification made something bigger instead of smaller. That night, the advisory board met at Rosie's after closing. They sat at a pushed-together pair of tables under a buzzing light and made the kind of decisions that only look small from a distance. Where the coat closet would live, which contractor would take shop class apprentices the first week, whether Tuesday, Thursday dinners should become Monday, Wednesday, Friday once the kitchen reopened. They should. Who would field media calls so Imani wouldn't have to choose between interviews and algebra club? Joe insisted on open meetings and minutes in a binder anyone could thumb through. Whalen offered a discount on every bolt and refused to say how much the discount was because it would insult him to quantify neighborliness. Ms. Diaz signed on, eyes bright behind end-of-day tired. Pastor Ellis promised the church basement for as long as it took and then some. Damien listened more than he spoke, took notes in block letters like the whiteboard and said, I don't know, teach me twice. which turned out to be as valuable as any check he wrote. When they finally stood to leave, Becky from the back slipped a pie into Imani's hands. "Filibuster fuel," she said, grinning. Out in the lot, the breath of their goodbyes hung in the cold like thought bubbles. Damien started toward the motel on foot. Kadeem fell in beside him automatically. Theo and Zion trailed, kicking at a ridge of refrozen slush until it surrendered. "So," Kadeem said after a block of good silence, "what's the first thing you've ever built that didn't belong to you?" "This," Damien said. "Feels weird," Theo asked. "Feels right," Damien answered. Zion pointed toward the dark, hulking silhouette of the youth center. "Tomorrow it sings different," he said, echoing Rourke. "Yeah," Kadeem said softly. "Tomorrow the roof learns a new song." Damien looked up into the cold, clear dark. The town's few lights made a small constellation. He could see where the community center stood not by sight, but by the shape of people gathered around it in his mind. Hands, hats, lists, laughter. He thought of the anonymous complaint, words meant to stop a thing that had already begun. He thought of the answer Pine Hollow had given. Show up, speak plain, vote loud, work harder. "Thank you," he said to the boys, to the town, to the wind that didn't care who he was, "for giving me a chair in the room." "Don't get comfy," Kadeem teased. "Chairs are for meetings. Tomorrow you're on ladders." "I'll bring better gloves," Damien said. "You'll bring time," Theo corrected. "And sandwiches," Zion added. "Deal," Damien said. "Time and sandwiches." They walked on. Behind them in the church window, the advisory board's handwritten sign glowed under a yellow bulb. "Open walk-through Thursday. 5 to argue with a pencil. Bring your kids tomorrow. The hammers would be louder and the complaints quieter. Tomorrow there would be sawdust in boots and soup on shirts and numbers on the whiteboard that lined up because neighbors made them line up. And when the first nail of the morning bit clean into new joist, the sound would travel out into the street, and then the town, and then the parts of their hearts that had been waiting, without saying it, for a roof that didn't leak and a plan that didn't either. Next, apprentices pick up their first pay envelopes. The van arrives, and an unexpected visitor from Damien's old life tests whether his word holds without a skyline behind it. Monday cracked open clear and blue, the kind of winter morning that pretends it never learned the word storm. Frost made lace on the youth center windows. In the church basement, steam lifted from a tray of cinnamon rolls Pastor Ellis swore were for emergencies only, which somehow included first payday. Rourke lined teenagers along a folding table like a foreman in a union hall from a sepia photograph. 6 manila envelopes weighted with names in block letters and greased thumbprints from the man who had sealed them. Nate bounced on his heels and tried to pretend he wasn't. Theo stood with his hands clasped behind his back, like a conductor about to cue a quiet piece. Zion grinned at everyone indiscriminately. Kadeem looked the way a good captain looks at captain's things, proud with both edges tucked in. "Rules," Rourke said. "You worked hours. You get paid for hours. You came on time. You left with your fingers. You wore your mask. You learned how to set a sister joist without making it cry. Raises come in quarters an hour, not promises per day. We do not talk amounts with each other. We talk about how to be worth them." He handed the first envelope to Nate. The kid palmed it like a rare card, then looked up. "Feels heavier than paper," he said. "That's because it is," Rourke replied deadpan. "It's time turned into something you can put in your pocket." Theo's envelope had a handwritten note clipped to it. "Good eye on the level line. Saved a sag later." Zion's had a sticker shaped like a hard hat because somebody somehow had put a sheet of them on the table, and you cannot leave a good sticker unspent. When Rourke gave Kadeem his, he squeezed the boy's shoulder once. "Your dad ever tell you the difference between bossing and leading?" Kadeem nodded. "Bossing starts with your mouth. Leading starts with your back." "Keep that," Rourke said. "You'll win more roofs than arguments." They stuffed the envelopes deep and stood taller without noticing. Monty handed them each a small spiral notebook. "Budget books," she said. "Write what you save for, what you spend on, what you give away. If money is a story, be the author." Zion scrawled on the first line in block letters. "Boots for Maya." Theo wrote quietly, "New library books." Kadeem left his top line blank. staring at the page until the emptiness felt like permission, then wrote, college course, one class, one real start. Above ground, the parking lot filled with a sound no one in Pine Hollow had heard in months. A new engine in a used van that wasn't coughing up its own history. The vehicle rolled in white and clean, a 12-passenger stalwart with steel in its spine, and snow tires that could teach shoes a thing or two. It wore the center's name in green letters along the side. Forest green, not flashy, familiar. Damien drove, knuckles pale from concentrating on not showing off. When he parked, he didn't honk. He killed the engine, stepped out, and held the keys up at shoulder height. He waited until people gathered, not to be watched, but to make sure the van got greeted like a new coworker on the first day. A tool, he said, not a trophy. We keep it clean, we keep logs, we fill the tank after each trip because the next trip is always urgent. Imani took the keys like a midwife taking a baby, cradling the plastic in both hands for a second. First run, she asked. Library in Missoula, Ms. Diaz answered without missing a beat. Their duplicates list dropped Friday. They'll give us 3 boxes if we can get there before they close at 4. Second run, Mr. Whalen said. Shelving from the shop class. We measured. Those kids want to see their work stand up to a stampede of chapter books. Third run, Zion added, eyes darting to his sister across the room. Boot store. Angela half laughed, half swallowed something. Third run, she agreed. They opened the doors. The van smelled like vinyl and chance. Seats folded down under Imani's forearm with a clack that whispered, yes. Nate slapped the side once, gentle, like patting a horse. We're going to need a chore chart, he said. If nobody's assigned to clean, it turns into a science project. Put the chart on the whiteboard, Imani said, and no one's name goes up there without theirs, and a parent's say so. We don't volunteer other people's time. They were still coiling the cargo straps when a rental SUV eased into a spot 2 down from the van. It did not look like Pine Hollow. It looked like the car you drive to say you did not want to look like you tried. The driver got out and shut the door without checking for the voice of the wind. Damien, he called, his Manhattan vowels crunching under the Montana air. I've been leaving you messages. The youth center's sound dimmed without anyone saying hush. Work paused in that particular way small towns learn, the one that lets a scene breathe and warns it not to run. Hello, Malcolm, Damien said. His voice did not change. It did change everything near it. Malcolm Roth had been Damien's second brain for 8 years. Chief Operating Officer, the man who knew the blood type of every deal, who could keep a pipeline moving with spreadsheets and a frown. He wore a wool coat that cost what the van's snow tires cost, and leather gloves that were born to hold nothing heavier than a portfolio. You look like you're insulating a barn, Malcolm said, eyeing the lumber stack, the row of hard hats, the teenager with a tape measure fanned against his chest like a medal. Can we talk, privately? We can talk here, Damien replied. This is where my calendar lives. Malcolm exhaled, a sound more appropriate for a boardroom than a parking lot. The sale is moving. The board is nervous. They're worried you've lost the plot. We have investors who thought you were stepping aside to chair the foundation in New York. Not, he gestured vaguely at everything, to play foreman in a town with one stoplight. Imani moved to stand beside Damien without asking if he needed standing beside. Kadeem stepped to his other side with the same instinct. Theo and Zion didn't crowd in. They held the line of work behind him, tape measures and gloves and notebooks in hand. Pastor Ellis appeared as if conjured by the words foundation in New York, which he had not heard but understood spiritually. What do you need from me, Malcolm? Damien asked. A statement, Malcolm said. 2 paragraphs. You stay through Q2 to ensure a smooth transition. You retain a seat on the company's board. You come back to the city twice a month. The foundation launches in Manhattan. Not here. It reassures stakeholders. It stops the whisper campaign that you've had a breakdown. The word hit Damien the way ice hits behind a collar. He saw the van's open doors in the corner of his eye. He saw the quiet cocoon blueprints peeking from a folder in Imani's arm. He saw Kadeem's fingers flex once, as if deciding between 2 sentences. No, Damien said. Malcolm blinked. No, to which part? All of it. You can't be serious. I am, Damien said. I'm selling the majority stake. I'm not sitting on the board. I'm not doing two lives badly when one life well could change more. Malcolm blew air into his cheeks, then let it go. Damien, I've defended you for 10 years. I told people you weren't reckless. You were disciplined. Don't make me a liar now. Come back for 6 months. Give a keynote. Throw old money at new problems from a safe distance. Don't tie your future to a place that will never scale. Imani chuckled softly. He still thinks scale means square feet. Malcolm turned toward her, not seeing her properly, the way men in certain suits do when they hear a woman laugh in a sentence they thought was theirs. And you are? The person who will be late to lunch if this conversation doesn't end soon, Imani said. We serve at 12, on time, even to people we disagree with. Damien spread his hand slightly. She runs the center. She runs me when I need it. She will run the foundation's local board until it can run itself, and then still run it because it will keep asking. She's why I'm staying. And them? Malcolm asked, chin flicking at the boys. My mentors, Damien said. The line worked better than he expected. It wasn't a line. It was the spine of the morning. Malcolm's shoulders sagged a fraction. He was not a villain. He was tired. He had slept on planes and between meetings and in the silence that comes when your emails outnumber your breaths. Do you realize what you're throwing away? He asked, and it sounded like worry, not threat. Yes, Damien said. And what I'm not. He looked past Malcolm's shoulder to where the permits, now official, sat clipped on a board with a cheerful magnet shaped like a carrot. He looked at the apprentices comparing scuff marks on their first day envelopes. He looked at Imani's hand and saw a tremor of adrenaline. Not fear, not anger, just the jolt of being alive in a fight that matters. Come see the inside, Damien said, surprising everyone, including himself. You don't have to like it. You can tell the board I've gone soft. But come see what this choice feels like before you write the memo. Something in Malcolm's face, the part that used to say yes to impossible travel and impulse chess matches in airports, tilted forward. 5 minutes, he said. They walked. Malcolm's shoes clicked in a room that had learned to stop apologizing for concrete floors. He stood in the doorway of the library where Ms. Diaz and Mrs. Pembry argued tenderly about Dewey Decimals, as if they were sorting families, not numbers. He peered into the computer lab where old towers warmed for their last week under a banner that read, "Coming soon," and did not specify how soon, because that would remove the joy of being dazzled ahead of schedule. He paused at the quiet cocoon and watched a little girl run her fingers along the egg carton ridges and smile at the shiver they made. Keeps the hammer out of your head, he asked her, trying on a tone he hadn't used since his niece's 7th birthday. She nodded solemnly. It makes my inside noise go somewhere else. He didn't have a form for that on any spreadsheet. Imani stopped at the kitchen. Volunteer hands moved with the ballet of practiced chaos. Onions, stock, bread laid out in lines. The van keys on a hook that someone had labeled with a drawing of a van because they could. Kadeem grabbed 2 flour sacks on instinct. Damien grabbed a third. Malcolm reached for the 4th, hesitated, then picked it up with both arms and surprised his coat. Think the board will mind? Damien asked as they set the sacks down. I think, Malcolm said slowly, the board stopped thinking of you as a person when your calendar filled 10 hours a day for 12 years. And you? I'm trying to remember, Malcolm admitted. Lunch came on time because Imani had rolled the variables until they behaved. Kids lined up. Trays slid. Please and thank you filled the space between ladle and plate. When the room settled into the soft percussion of spoons on bowls, Angela touched Damien's sleeve. You want to say grace? She asked. Damien's throat closed around 1,000 words shaped like numbers. I don't know how to do it right, he said. There isn't a wrong way, Angela answered. There's only honest. He cleared his throat. Thank you for hot soup, he began, voice low and a little awkward. And for roofs that don't leak, for hands that work and backs that hold, for a van that runs and a town that runs better, for people who show up, for boys who teach men, for the chance to do the next right thing. Amen, the room said, robust and unanimous as a vote. After, when the tables were wiped and the van roster for Missoula and the boot store had been sketched on a yellow pad, Malcolm stood by the door like a man who had entered a museum and learned it was a school. What do I tell them? He asked quietly. The truth, Damien said. Tell them I'm not coming back. Tell them to sign the papers. Tell them the foundation has a local board, an open ledger, and a line item called joy that we will not strike. Tell them to invest their energy in running without me instead of pulling on a rope that leads to a door I closed. Malcolm looked at the door. He looked at Damien. He looked at Kadim, who had just handed his pay envelope to Ms. Imani and asked her to split it, half into savings, a quarter to the boot run, a quarter to the library list. I'll call in the car, Malcolm said, which was his way of saying goodbye. Then he paused. I may come back on Thursday. For the open walkthrough? Imani asked. For the soup, Malcolm said, and to see if the roof sings different. It will, Kadim told him. We tuned it. Malcolm left without shaking hands because he didn't know which set to pick, and because sometimes you shouldn't end a scene with punctuation. The SUV's tires crunched, then hummed, then softened into distance. Outside, the van door slid shut with a sound that felt like an answer. Miss Diaz and 3 eighth-graders buckled into the Missoula run. Angela counted heads twice and then once more for luck. Zion leaned through the doorway and shouted, Boot store is not optional, which earned cheers from a row of small feet. Damien watched the van pull out under a sky that had decided to be on their side for the day. He felt Malcolm's absence like you feel a tooth you've decided to have removed, tender, relieved, an ache that promises not to turn into infection. Rourke clapped once like a cymbal. Back to it, he said. We got joist waiting and paint that won't stir itself. Up the ladder, Damien found his rhythm again. Up, measure, mark, down, carry, hold. Beside him, Kadim learned how to read the story a plank tells before it says it out loud. On the ground, Theo ran the chord with a dancer's sense of where to be and not be. In the doorway, Imani scratched a note about coat sizes and underlined the word boots twice. Mid-afternoon, a sound rose from the roof that had not been there the day before. Not the screech of nails forced into rot. Not the complaint of wood being asked to do jobs it no longer could. A different sound. Clean bite. True settle. A rhythm you could keep time to without apologizing to yourself later. Zion put a hand on the wall and felt it in his palm. Hear that? He said to Maya. It's like the building learned to breathe out. Maya nodded, then tucked her fingers into her new boots and smiled at the squeak they made on the floor. Near dusk, the van returned. Books, shelf planks, and paper grocery bags marched into the church like a parade that forgot it wasn't allowed to play trumpets. The boot store had thrown in 3 pairs for free and a box of wool socks because Asha Patel had called ahead and told them what this was about. Ms. Diaz had talked an assistant librarian into adding 2 donated encyclopedias of everything that would become everything to a kid this spring. They ate second soup and planned Tuesday's list and argued kindly about where the skate pad should go when the ground thawed. Malcolm did not call, the board did not text, the world did not end. Under the fluorescent thrum, Damien wrote 3 more lines on the whiteboard. Thank you, James Brooks. Argue with a pencil. Joy is a line item. He capped the marker and stepped back. Kadim stood beside him, arms folded, future uncurling. You kept your word, Kadim said. So did you, Damien answered. Which part? You told me ladders are tomorrow, Damien said and tapped the metal rungs with a knuckle. Tomorrow came. They turned as the church door opened a crack, and the cold stuffed a hand in, curious. Outside, the sky was a deep, honest blue. Stars squinted through the town's minimal glow. Somewhere, Malcolm was drafting a different kind of memo. Somewhere, the board was learning the shape of a company without its founder in the chair. Here, a roofline squared itself against weather and history. Here, pay envelopes rustled like small flags. Here, a van with room for joy slept under a soft powder of new snow. Tomorrow, the paint would open, and the first coat would go on in strokes wide and sure. Tomorrow, the library shelves would be bolted to studs and hold more weight than anyone thought modest wood could bear. Tomorrow, a kid would check out a book that would change the way they talked to themselves. But tonight, the sound that filled the room was smaller and stranger, and somehow large enough for everyone. The sound of a town resting after moving forward together. By Tuesday morning, the cold had relaxed its jaw. Sun spilled into Pine Hollow in thin, eager lines that did nothing for the thermometer and everything for morale. The roofing crew sang their odd, tuneless work songs under wool caps. Rourke's voice carried like a saw. Measure twice, curse once. The apprentices, badges of blue painter's tape stuck to hard hats, answered with the ragged chorus of kids who had learned what it meant to be on a crew. Hammers found rhythm, nails bit clean. The building began to take its new shape like a story finally getting past its chapter of excuses. Inside, paint lids popped with little thunderclaps. Imani had a rule about colors, warm enough to stop your shoulders from living up by your ears. The main room took cream without argument. The trim took forest green like it had been waiting its whole life to wear it, and every stroke kept an old promise. This place will be softer on your eyes and harder to break. Damien cut in alongside Miss Diaz on a ladder he had learned to respect yesterday. High corners first, she said. Then you work down so your drips confess instead of hide. Confession is good for walls, he agreed, steadying the tray. On the library side, Mrs. Pembry and two eighth-graders sorted the Missoula Hall into soft stacks. The new shelves, built by the shop class from planks Mr. Whalen had planed himself, stood like fresh teeth against the wall. Off to the side, Nate and the apprentices laid a roll of low-pile carpet squares for the reading nook, with the kind of concentration that turns chatter into an instrument. Zion hung a paper sign over the quiet cocoon. Please whisper inside, noises get first dibs. Angela returned from the boot store run with a trunk full of wool socks and the kind of caffeinated grin that said she'd arm wrestled a discount from a chain store manager by sheer mom aura. She deposited a bag on Imani's desk. For Maya and two others who think wet socks are a personality. Wet socks aren't a personality. They're a cry for help, Imani said, hugging her. By mid-morning, the snowbanks along the lot wore grooves from comings and goings like a sculptor's fingerprints. The van log, mounted on a clipboard with cartoon van doodles courtesy of Zion, had two new pages and a growing list of responsible adults authorized to drive. Someone had drawn a tiny crown above Angela's name. No one admitted who. The whiteboard grid took on fresh ink. Roof, 60%, electric, 40%, plumbing, 35%, HVAC, 25%, lead safe abatement, started. Under budget, Damien wrote a number that would have bought his Manhattan condo's dining table chairs. He underlined it and added, Friday, post receipts. Argue with a pencil. At noon, a county sedan nosed into the lot. A man stepped out in a charcoal coat and a smile too practiced to be local. He had the look of someone who'd never worn a hat because the day would never dare rain on him. He offered a hand to Imani and skipped a name. I'm with the commissioner's office, he said. We're excited about your project. Inspector Halverson has been a dream, Imani answered, motioning to the site sign where permits. Approved sat under a magnet shaped like a carrot. We're moving. The man's eyes slid to the roofline. The tarps gone, the gray skeleton of new joists visible where old ones had been. He smiled again, smaller. I'm here unofficially, he said in a tone that made the word official lean forward to hear the rest. We occasionally encounter complications, federal grant eligibility, right-of-way clarifications, noise variances. It can get messy. I can get it clean. Rourke, passing with a bundle of conduit, did not pause his stride. He did adjust his route subtly so that he crossed between the man and Imani, the way old dogs place themselves between porches and coyotes without announcing a policy. Damien came down the ladder, paint on his knuckles, a stripe of cream in his hair that made him look younger and ridiculous and more dangerous than he had ever looked in a suit. Complications like what? He asked. The man's eyes flicked to Damien's hands and back to his face, taking inventory. The anonymous complaint created a procedural snag at the zoning board, he said. It'll clear. It just needs attention. Paperwork speeds up when the right people are persuaded. Imani's mouth flattened. We don't pay to make line jumpers out of paper. Not paying, the man said, summoning a word with less stain. Contributing. The county parks fund is under strain. A 5-figure contribution from your foundation would go a long way. In turn, you get a waiver on the temporary occupancy cap so you can reopen a few weeks sooner. Win-win. Theo, who had been quiet in a way that meant he was hearing everything, looked to Kadim, who looked to Damien, who looked to the library doorway where Maya traced the lip of a book with one finger and smiled at its smell. No, Damien said. The man's smile thinned to a professional shape. You're new here. Not to being asked for something that mutates the truth, Damien said. Process protects us, especially when we're in a hurry. We'll make the time honest. The man's gaze chilled a degree. You'll regret losing weeks. Imani stepped forward, calm as a lake that knows its depth. Sir, if a delay is the cost of not teaching our kids how to cheat, we can pay it. Rourke, returning with the conduit's twin, tossed a look that could fillet a fish. We're teaching those kids to use a level, he said. Keep the town spirit on the bubble. The man's hands opened in a gesture that said, I tried to be reasonable. I'll report your position, he said, not bothering to hide the warning as he started for his car. Do, Imani said. Report that we said, no thank you, with our whole chest. He left. The sedan's tires rolled the snow into new curls. Silence landed for a second and then cracked like ice under a boot. Zion blew out a breath he'd forgotten he was holding. Did we just make an enemy? He asked. We made a decision, Kadeem said, eyes on Damien, checking for wobble, finding none. Also, Imani added, we just made mac and cheese with real cheese, and it will get cold if we have an entire ethical debate in the doorway. Back to ladders, lunch in 10. They worked faster after the man left, not frenzied but focused, like an orchestra after the conductor cuts through heckling with a joke and a glare. When they ate, kids told stories about the kinds of school day dramas that end by dinner. Malcolm did not call. Halverson texted Imani, don't pay. I've got this. The message had a photo attached, a copy of the Municipal Ethics Code with 2 lines highlighted and the date circled. Imani grinned. Favorite photo of the week, she said, holding up her phone like a trophy. By late afternoon, the main room's second coat was on, and the cream had settled from fresh paint to quiet light. The trim gleamed. The library shelves waited upright along the wall like a chorus line before the first number. The gym, tear out complete, wore a new subfloor that bounced back underfoot in a way that promised fewer ankle rolls and more games that felt like flight. On a table near the door, a small bronze plaque lay under a towel like a secret waiting to be revealed. Joe Brooks had come by during lunch, set it down without ceremony, and left. Imani hadn't peeked. She was a ceremonialist by instinct. She liked firsts to happen at the right temperature. They gathered at 4, paint drips on cheeks, sawdust in cuffs, soup on sleeves. Damien folded back the towel. The plaque was not ornate. It was solid and kind. James Brooks Memorial Hall. In honor of a man who taught his sons, his town, and a stranger that true wealth is measured in lives changed. 2025. Under the words, a simple line engraving, a hand bracing a tire while 2 smaller hands tightened a lug nut, a third held a flashlight steady. Kadeem read it out loud once, then again, then a third time, each slower. His throat worked around the lines. Theo's fingers found the edge and traced it like a sentence he wanted to memorize by touch. Zion wiped his eyes with the heel of his palm and did not pretend he wasn't doing it. We'll mount it after the last coat dries, Imani said. So the wall remembers. Walls remember? Damien asked. Only if you teach them how, she said. We are the teachers. They were closing up when the first flakes started again. Not enough to threaten, just enough to remind everyone that weather has opinions. The apprentices stacked ladders with the care of people who had learned the hard way that gravity has a temper. Rourke did a last walk, palm flat to the new joists, listening. He nodded once, satisfied. At the van, Imani handed out the next day's index cards. She had invented the practice on the fly. It had stuck by usefulness. Each card bore 3 words in marker. Task, time, team. Write the first thing you'll do at 8 away, she said. Write how long you think it'll take. Write who you need. If it takes longer, it takes longer. But we go to bed having already promised the morning. Zion wrote, move Kokon to new corner. 45 men. Zion Maya, quiet team. Theo wrote, label shelves AM, 2 HRS, Theo MS. Pembry Nate, if he's nice. Kadeem wrote, tape Jim, 3-point, 1 HR. Kadeem, Rourke, anyone who shoots. Damien wrote, coat 2, trim door frames, bring sandwiches. 3 HRS. Damien and whoever is hungry. Bring sandwiches, Zion read over his shoulder, approving. That's the most important line item. Always is, Damien said. They split for the night at a crosswalk of jokes and yawns. At Rosie's, Betty had taped up a new sign. Open walk-through Thursday, 5 p.m. Pie is a form of public comment. Her attempt at drawing the van looked like a bread loaf with windows. The stick figure kids on top wore hard hats and held books. Damien walked toward the motel with Kadeem and Theo, the snow hushing their boots. The town had learned to watch him without watching him. A man from the feed store nodded. A woman watering a spider plant in an apartment window waved with the kind of slow economy that makes a greeting carry farther. From behind, tires whispered and Damien paused out of habit, city reflex, and turned. A black SUV rolled past, not Malcolm's. As it went by, the passenger window eased down a crack. A phone camera glinted. The SUV didn't stop. It didn't need to. The video would edit itself online into a narrative designed to be as accurate as a rumor and twice as sticky. "Think it's the gossip blogs?" Theo asked quietly. "Let them have footage of tired people doing honest things," Damien said. "If they want scandal, they'll have to settle for the color of our trim." "Forest green," Kadeem said. "Put that in your headline." At the motel, there was a box outside Damien's door, anonymous and unassuming. Inside, an old hammer, the handle oiled by a lifetime of grip, the head clean, the claw sharp. A note, block letters in a hand that didn't write often but meant it when it did. J. Brooks's hammer. He would have wanted it swinging. Joe Damien took the weight of it into his palm. It fit like a sentence he had been practicing in a language he finally spoke. He held it up to the light, to see the grain, to see the nicks. The motel heat clicked on. The snow touched the window and stayed. He wrote a reply on the back of an old receipt and taped it to Joe's mailbox 5 blocks away. "I'll swing it on the first nail tomorrow. Thank you for trusting me with a voice that isn't mine." The next morning he did. The first nail of Wednesday slid into new wood under James Brooks' hammer, with a sound that emptied out something old in the walls and filled it with a chord. People looked up from work at the same time without planning to. Monty smiled without showing teeth. Rourke closed his eyes like a coach hearing a racket turn into music. At lunch, Halvorsen arrived with a file under her arm and triumph barely concealed in her grin. "Zoning board voted to ignore the anonymous complaint," she reported. "We're on the record as proceeding under emergency authority and regular authorizations. And I sent your friend from the commissioner's office a copy of the ethics code with a note that said, 'The answer is still no.'" Imani saluted with a ladle. By afternoon, the boys taped off the gym's 3-point arc with reverence. "We do it right or we don't do it," Kadeem said, quoting the man whose hammer he had placed back in Damien's hands at daybreak. Nate measured twice, corrected a degree, measured again. Theo snapped chalk lines so clean they could be notes on a staff. Zion tried a test bounce on the new floor and found its heart. Just before closing, Angela and Asha Patel rolled a garment rack into the main room. Coats, dozens, hung in a fat rainbow. Reds, blues, greens, neutrals, a purple with a hood trimmed in fake fur that would make one kid's week. Angela clipped a laminated sign above it. "Coat closet. Take what fits. Return what doesn't. No questions." Imani clapped. "Put it by the door," she said, "where pride can pretend it's just passing by." When the last ladder was stowed and the van keys hung and the soup pot soaked, Damien lingered under the new trim, eyes soft. From somewhere outside, a car horn peeped twice, the universal signal of, "Hey you, I see you. Be careful out there." He thought of the man who had offered to move the line for a price and felt the click of something that mattered fall into place. You cannot build a house on a bribe and then ask it to keep your children honest. He wrote one more line on the whiteboard under joy as a line item. "No shortcuts that make us small." Everyone who walked past underlined it once, like a secret oath. The week tilted toward Thursday's open walkthrough. The kids practiced how to be tour guides, explaining what the negative air machines did without making it scary, showing how the new thermostats worked with a flourish like a magician, revealing a trick. The apprentices rehearsed the safety talk and argued over who got to demonstrate the wrong way to carry a ladder. Rourke vetoed the bit where anyone pretended to drop anything. That night, Damien's phone buzzed with a number from New York. His thumb hovered, then pressed. "Paperwork complete," Malcolm said without preamble. "Sale closed. You're free. There's buzz. Some think you're nuts. Some think you're a saint. Most think tomorrow will come without you, and it will. What do you think? Damien asked. I think I'm tired of being good at things that don't outlive my inbox, Malcolm said. Tell Imani I'm coming Thursday. I'll bring pie. Don't put me on a committee. No one escapes committees, Damien said. But you can carry ladders and disappear before the minutes get typed. They laughed like two men remembering they had been friends before they had been useful. He hung up and looked out at Pine Hollow through the thin motel curtain. Snow stippled the lot in the kind of pattern you only notice when you intend to. The van slept under a halo of streetlight. Across town, the youth center held its new bones, the paint whispering itself dry, the plaque waiting beneath a towel. He pictured the boys asleep, boots drying on vents, pay envelopes tucked in drawers next to dollar store treasures. He wrote two last words on an index card beside his bed and slid it into his jacket for morning. Bring sandwiches. He would, because people showed up for Payne and Joyce and ethics and applause. But they built a thing with sandwiches and time and names on the wall that didn't ask for money, only a moment to be said aloud. Tomorrow, Pine Hollow would walk its own future, side by side, pointing with pride at lines made straight, wires run safe, a roof that sang a different key. And if anyone asked what it cost, they would say the number and then tell the truth. The price of saying no when yes would have been faster. Thursday's sky began the color of pewter and stayed there, as if it had decided on a mood and refused to be coached out of it. Pine Hollow didn't mind. It had meetings to run, tours to host, pies to slice. The open walkthrough drew a crowd the size of a homecoming game. Farmers with caps, teachers with tote bags, parents with toddlers in star-patterned boots, teenagers pretending they weren't thrilled to wear hard hats. Imani stood at the church door with a clipboard and a grin. Sign the waiver, she sang. Earn a sticker. The sticker said, I argued with a pencil, and featured a pencil drawn by Zion with a cape. Halverson dealt out loner hard hats like library books. Bring it back or keep it for fashion, she said. Either way, chin straps are not optional. Rourke gave a safety brief so crisp it would have made a Navy chief nod. Don't touch plastic with warning labels. Don't touch anything you didn't ask permission to touch. If you don't know where to put your hands, put them in your pockets. Groups fanned through the building. The new roofline raised eyebrows and the occasional hallelujah. The lead abatement team drew questions. Their battery of machines hummed like calm, and their air monitors flashed numbers that Halverson seemed to love in a way that made everyone else decide to, too. In the main room, adults reached out to touch the cream wall and then pulled back, embarrassed by their own impulse to pat a building like a friendly animal. Angela stationed herself at the coat closet. Children beelined to the purple jacket with the fake fur. Angela didn't say, "May I help you?" She said, "Will that one make you fast?" And the girl, who had learned to measure her wants in small teaspoons, nodded like a sprinter at the blocks. In the gym, Kadeem demonstrated the three-point arc chalking process, like a docent who had discovered he enjoyed talking. We measure from the nail at the baseline, he said, and we respect the arc even when our feet want to cheat. Nate took a shot from the top of the key in work boots. It rimmed out with a forgiving clatter that sounded like the gym making friends with him in public. Damien stayed off the microphone and on the edges, pointing to labels, fetching coffee, answering questions with short sentences and longer pauses. People asked him where he lived. Pine Motel, he said, asked how long he was staying. Long enough. Asked if the Rolls would be a regular at the grocery lot. The van is, he answered, which got him a few nods and one deliberate, grudging smile from Mr. Pike. Malcolm arrived halfway through the first hour, wearing a thrifted parka and a New York scowl that had softened into something like weathered curiosity. He handed Imani a pie box with both hands. Blueberry, he said. I bribed the baker in the next town over. We accept legal bribes, Imani replied. Soup's on at noon. If you clear tables like you mean it, we won't put you on a committee. Is that a promise? He asked. It's a threat, she said cheerfully. He fell in behind a group led by Theo, who handled delicate questions like a diplomat. Why forest green? A woman asked. Because it looks like it belongs, Theo replied, and because if we ever have to repaint a baseboard in a hurry, we can find the color at Wayland's on a Tuesday. At 1:17 p.m., as the second wave of tours finished apple pie and the first wave of apprentices measured twice just to show off, the lights went out. Not a flicker, a swallow. Everything. Fans, hums, buzzes, stopped. The quiet had weight. If this is a drill, I didn't authorize it, Imani said, already moving toward the breaker panel. Transformer, Rourke guessed, eyes narrowing. Stormline pop or a squirrel with bad timing. Phones lit the room like pocket lanterns. A murmur rose and then broke into practical sentences. Kids to the basement, Imani called. Phones on low brightness. Volunteers to the kitchen. Pastor, can we? I'm ahead of you, Pastor Ellis said, his voice carrying calm like a basket. The church generator kicks in 3 minutes after the grid goes. We'll be warm, we'll have light, we'll have coffee, we'll pretend we didn't just lose power because we didn't. He pointed to two teens. You, doors. Hold them open so the push bars don't lock with the power hiccup. HVAC, Damien asked, already thinking of duct routes and battery backups. Off, Halverson answered. We shut down negative air in abatement rooms by protocol when the grid dies. Doors stay sealed. Public rooms only until we check generators. Coats, Angela said, rolling the rack toward the stairs like a general moving artillery. Damien felt the pivot, the way a plan turns into a different plan with everyone still on the same side. He could feel his old life pressing against the moment. Crisis equals email. Outage equals vendor ticket. Delay equals blame. Pine Hollow's answer was different. Bodies in the right places, voices at the right volumes, children unconcerned because the grown-ups were not performing concern, they were doing. He grabbed a flashlight and headed to the mechanical room with Rourke and two apprentices. Look for the obvious first, Rourke advised. When in doubt, put your hand on the machine and listen with your skin. They found the obvious. A grid fault had tripped a main breaker. The meter was dead. The world beyond this wall had decided to nap. They radioed Pastor Ellis on the walkie-talkies he kept for snow days and VBS. Generator up, he reported. Basement hot, coffee hotter. Take your time. Back upstairs, Malcolm reappeared with a stack of coloring pages and a box of crayons that looked like it had served since the Clinton administration. Art class in the quiet cocoon, he announced. Theme, draw the sound the roof makes now. Kids poured in. 30 minutes earlier, the quiet cocoon had been a luxury, a nice to have. Now it was a classroom that didn't need a wall outlet to do its job. Maya drew a slow, looping line and colored it the color of toast. It sounds like warm bread, she said, and Malcolm, who had never in his life assigned a color to a sound before, filed the phrase away under things I want to remember when I'm old. Imani did a head count. Halverson did a second. Both sets of numbers matched. The van keys hung on the hook, labeled with their doodle. The coat closet was suddenly lighter. Good, that was its purpose. Angela began to pack a box quietly for Mrs. Vargas, who did not like to admit she needed anything, and therefore would find a box on her steps, as if delivered by a clumsy saint who had forgotten to knock. At 2:03, the grid yawned and shrugged and returned. Lights banged to life like cymbals. Fans spun up. Machines recommitted to humming. The cheer that rolled through the building wasn't loud. It was relieved in a way that made you want to put your hand on the wall and say, "Good job, friend." Check every circuit you touch this week, Halverson called, pointing, and a dozen staff and volunteers dispersed like white blood cells to test, verify, sign off. Imani exhaled once, big. We just passed an exam no one scheduled, she said to no one and everyone. Soup's hot, Pastor Ellis said from the stairwell. Calories are morale. Morale is code. They served an early dinner. People who hadn't planned to stay stayed because the day had demanded more of them than expected, and because staying felt like a way to thank each other for not panicking. Malcolm cleared tables like a man proving a point to himself. Damien wiped a spill and didn't think about late fees or schedules. Kadim leaned back in his chair, exhausted and bright-eyed, like a captain at the end of a good game that didn't look like one on paper. After cleanup, they convened in the main room with folding chairs and the whiteboard. The open walkthrough turned into a debrief without changing its name. People offered observations, not complaints. Coat closet needs a mirror. Kids couldn't reach the new library labels. Quiet cocoon should have a battery lantern. Skate pad needs a sign. Helmets or Ben& Jerry's won't sponsor us. Imani wrote everything down in sharp, pleasant letters that made even the silliest idea feel invited. At the back, Malcolm leaned against a wall listening for something he hadn't known he'd missed. Neighbors arguing kindly about improvements that would not make them famous. He caught Damien's eye once and nodded. It was the kind of nod you give when you put a story in your mouth, taste it, and decide to keep eating. As the meeting broke up, a man in a UPS jacket wheeled in a dolly stacked with 2 long boxes and 3 smaller ones. Delivery for Brooks, Reeves, Sterling, he recited, reading a label. Somebody's Christmas came early. They opened the long boxes to reveal 10 youth-sized sticks and goalie pads. A note sat on top in familiar block letters. From Joe. James always wanted a floor hockey night. Ikshom. He never let me play goalie. Now it's your turn. Zion whooped. Nate claimed a net assembly with the solemnity of a knighting ceremony. Ms. Diaz scheduled hockey for people who have never seen hockey for Wednesday. Malcolm confessed he'd watch. He didn't skate. By the time the last child zipped into a purple jacket and the last parent promised to return a borrowed hat when spring swallowed the frost, the sky had deepened to a navy that Pine Hollow knew well. People said goodnight in 2s and 3s because solitary goodbyes are for cities. Imani locked the side door, then unlocked it again because someone had forgotten a mitten, then locked it for real. Outside, Damien walked Malcolm to the rental SUV. They stood in the steam of their own breath like 2 men in a grainy photograph. Stay, Damien said. Just for a week. You can write your memos from the back table at Rosie's. I can't, Malcolm said. I have a board to quit and an apartment to pack and a sister's voicemail to return. But I'll be back by the time the library opens. Consider it a threat. Damien held out his hand. Malcolm shook it. The handshake felt less like a business oath and more like an exchange of 2 words. Next time. At the motel, Damien found himself too awake to sleep and too tired to be awake. He walked back out, down to the lot where the van slept, over to the community center whose walls still smelled like courage under paint. He stood under the dark eave and thought about the power outage that had been a rehearsal for something he hadn't known he was afraid of. Failure in public. He realized he wasn't afraid of that if it looked like this. If everyone failed into motion and then succeeded like a chore. If the worst headline said only, "Town tries hard." He went home and for once didn't check his old email. It would still be there tomorrow. Tomorrow doors would open and children would run on a floor that didn't apologize underfoot. Tomorrow the plaque would go up and a name would live on a wall made of the same honesty that had taught the town to keep saying yes together. On Friday, they would post the receipts and invite people to argue with a pencil. And on Saturday, they would do something that had not been on any whiteboard this week. They would rest. Pine Hollow had earned a nap. Saturday morning arrived clean, empty of agenda, full of ceremony. The snow fell in a fine curtain. It wasn't a storm, and it wasn't nothing. It was a frame. Families filled the lot, and the sidewalk, and the patch of grass by the church that insisted on being a park every time it wasn't covered. The van gleamed modestly. The Rolls stayed in its spot on Juniper Lane, under a respectful code of quiet. The building stood plain and proud in cream and forest green, which the town had decided could be called Pine Hollow colors, now without a vote. Imani stepped to the small plywood podium that Pastor Ellis had draped in a faded quilt to make it look less like a thing once used for sheetrock. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't need to. Her voice had learned how to roll without microphones during too many years of telling the truth to children in rooms that sounded like cafeterias. "Welcome home, Nay," she said, and the crowd answered without needing to be taught. "Welcome home." She told the short story of a long winter. She thanked the people that lists can contain and the ones lists can't. She pointed at the whiteboard with its budget and smiled at the way pencils had circled and underlined and sighed next to line items. She reminded everyone that open walkthroughs would continue because being seen kept a building clean. Then she called Angela and Joe forward to lift the towel from the wall. They did it together, hands steady, breath uneven. The plaque caught the light like a small thing that had decided to be larger inside. People clapped the way you clap at a wedding when the vow lands exactly on the word that makes the room cry. Kadeem did not speak. He didn't need to. He stood with his back straight and his face wet, and let a building in a town say the line he'd been carrying for a year. Theo took his glasses off and wiped them with a corner of his shirt in a move that had become a tell and that no one teased. Zion leaned into Damien's side without comment. Sometimes children just choose a shoulder and adults let them. Damien did say one thing. He stepped to the quilted podium and kept his hands on its edge like a person learning not to hold on to something all the time. "Thank you for letting me build something that doesn't belong to me," he said. "Thank you for teaching me that the hardest work is done with sandwiches and time and saying no to shortcuts that make us small. Thank you for giving me a chair in the room. I'll give it up when someone younger and kinder bumps my knee and asks if they can have a turn." The ribbon cut was literal and modest. Green fabric from Wayland's cut with a pair of scissors that had seen generations of wrapping paper. The door swung open. The smell inside was paint, wood, paper, coffee, and hope. Children sprinted to the library and stopped short on instinct, turned and walked instead. Teachers in their hearts. They found the new chairs and sat in them with that reverence kids give to furniture they aren't afraid of. Ms. Diaz cried once and used it to lubricate 10 book spines. In the computer lab, screens came up fast and stayed up. The splash screen said "Welcome to Pine Hollow Lab," and then gave way to a page where the first button said "Library," and the second said "Homework," and the third said "Play." Theo's fingers hovered over the keyboard like a pianist about to play after years of air. He typed the center's name, then his own. He did not hit backspace. In the gym, a ball thumped and sang and leaped. The three-point arc held. The new hoops accepted each shot with a sigh like forgiveness. Kadeem stepped to the line and sunk one, and then another, and then missed on purpose so the sound in the room would be a cloud, not a blade. Nate laughed without the hardness that had lived in it at the start of winter. In the kitchen, steam radiated at a temperature that made adults look at each other and say, "It feels like my grandmother's house." Volunteers moved like a ballet you learn after working 3 piano recitals and an emergency shelter in one building. Malcolm arrived with a stack of paper plates and a smile that had stopped trying to pretend it lived anywhere else. He cleared tables like a penance he didn't mind paying. The quiet cocoon held 2 children and 1 teenager who didn't think anyone saw him cry when a sudden loud laugh in the gym sent his mind somewhere it didn't like. Zion saw, sat at the edge of the quilt, and drew a roof. Sometimes safety is a picture someone makes next to you without saying your name. At noon, the coat closet looked like a joke that had lost its punchline because it had done its work and was now half empty. Angela wrote on a sheet taped to the end, "Needs size 6, 8, 10. Thank you, like, really." A box appeared beside it with hats and gloves and a single new scarf someone had clearly knitted last night because they had been told what size to make their love. After lunch, tours restarted because grandparents had arrived late on purpose so they could be impressed in front of their grandkids. Joe explained to 2 men who had installed half the church roofs in the valley how the Sister Joyce made him less of a hypocrite when he told his back to behave. Halverson pointed at the negative air machines with proprietary pride. Pastor Ellis took Malcolm into the boiler room and converted him to the religion of preventative maintenance. Around 2, a car with out-of-state plates edged into a space and sat like a question. A man and a woman got out, mid-50s, well-dressed in the way of people who own wardrobes, not outfits. They stood on the sidewalk as if the concrete might lurch under them. "Damien," the woman called. He turned in a way that made Kadeem glance up fast. Damien's mother and stepfather. Pine Hollow registered them like the town registers new weather, by weight and by the speed at which they tried to tell the room who they were. "We saw the piece on the news," she said, embracing him at the shallow end and then deeper, her ring clicking against his jacket zipper. "You're really here." "I am," he said. His stepfather extended a hand. "We were worried you'd had a—" He searched for the nice word and found none that fit. "Episode." Damien smiled without heat. "I had an onset of context," he said. "It seems to be chronic." They walked the building. They paused at the plaque, a name they didn't know for a man they hadn't met. They asked the kind of questions people ask when they realize they missed a decade of someone's life in the span of a morning. Why here? Why now? What broke? What healed? Damien answered some and let others land without catching them. A many came by, and, without introducing herself, handed his mother a paper cup of coffee and said, "He's fine," which made the older woman cry in the way relief makes you cry when you thought you weren't going to. They left with hugs that would be unpacked in therapy and in kitchens for a long time. Damien watched their car pull out, then turn, then vanish. He felt nothing shatter. He felt a net feather and hold. By late afternoon, the place had the feel of a beach after a good tide. Little piles of joy everywhere, predictable and surprising. The shop class came to see their shelves and took 10 group photos in front of them because you take pictures near the thing you made even if it's rectangular and boring to strangers. The advisory board met in the corner by the new thermostat, a sacred object now, and set 3 agendas for next week. Coat closet resupply, apprenticeship schedule, the first field trip in the van that wasn't an errand. Zoo, Zion lobbied. Planetarium, Theo countered. Skate rink, Nate chimed in. Library, Ms. Diaz said simply, which somehow won the vote. In the evening, the building emptied at a hubbub pace, not a scramble. Parents thanked without speeches. Children promised to return books and meant it in a way that would be tested and coached kindly. Volunteers stacked chairs with the kind of care that meant Monday wouldn't hurt. Rourke ran a calloused hand along a new rail and smiled the secret smile of people who sleep better when boards line up. Before he left, Damien took out a folder and walked to the podium. He laid 3 papers in a neat overlap and weighed them with the hammer Joe had given him. When Imani drifted by, she paused. "What's that?" she asked. "The paperwork to sell the rolls," he said. She blinked once. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said. "It can buy 5 vans or 2 roofs or 100,000 sandwiches. And besides, every time I see it, I hear a version of myself that believed in the wrong measurements." Imani looked at him for a long second. "We won't put your name on the bill of sale," she said. "We'll put it on a ledger line called Ripple." He laughed. "Deal. And if you miss it at midnight," she added, "go stand in the gym and bounce a ball. The sound is better than leather. It says the kind of thing a car can never say back to you." He did later, when the lights were low and the building had joined the town in breathing. He bounced a ball in the half-dark and listened to it return a word he had never heard in his old house. Stay. Spring came like a rumor that insisted and then became a headline. Snow pulled back. The skate pad dried and found its angle. The van learned a dozen new routes and the names of 3 towns the GPS had the gall to pronounce wrong. Apprentices graduated to part-time wages and a line on a resume that meant someone would look twice and say, "You did real things with real things." Kadeem finished his class, college writing, Monday nights, community college a county over, by writing an essay called Torque that made Ms. Diaz put her head down on her desk and pretend she just remembered something in the bottom drawer. Theo interned at the library and created a system for tracking holds that used index cards and a binder and sheer force of personality. Zion started a Wednesday music hour where kids banged on buckets and learned to keep time with each other before they kept time with anything else. Imani and Pastor Ellis and Waylon and Ms. Diaz and Joe and Angela and 2 rotating parents held advisory board meetings where the minutes read like poems to anyone who understood how beauty hides in practicalities. Malcolm moved to a cottage that used to be a hunting rental and learned the name of the bird that woke him and stopped measuring sleep by how many emails he could write before coffee. The foundation launched with a website that looked like a clipboard and a map with 3 push pins and then 5 and then 10. Money moved out as fast as it came in. People with serious titles gave speeches in other places about the Pine Hollow model, open ledgers, open walkthroughs, youth apprenticeships, coat closets, quiet cocoons, soup. Damien traveled to 2 towns and refused to be the face, insisting on being a ladder until he had to give a 30-second comment that did not include the word vision. In June, Pine Hollow hosted a picnic in the field behind the center. A banner hung between 2 borrowed poles. "Thank you, James." On the schedule, floor hockey, read aloud under the new maple, 3 songs from a middle school band that had discovered a drummer who could hold an audience together like glue. At the microphone, Kadeem said 11 words that melted the ice left from a long season. "My dad would have loved how loud we are when we help." People laughed. People cried. People ate potato salad and did not put raisins in it because that would have been divisive. At dusk, the plaque caught the last rash of sun and threw it back into the main room. Damien stood under it, listening to the kind of laughter that sounds like a town letting down its shoulders. He thought about the first morning on the side of the road, the blizzard and the boys and the wrench and the refusal. He thought about a Rolls Royce idling on Juniper Lane and a ribbon that went on a different hood. He thought about the anonymous complaint, the bribe that wasn't, the afternoon the lights went out and the town stayed on. He thought about wealth, the word he had grabbed too hard for too long, and how it had changed shapes in his hands until it fit. Wealth was a library shelf that would hold weight for 20 years. Wealth was a van log with names that rotated because sharing is maintenance. Wealth was a plaque that didn't need a larger font. Wealth was a hammer passed from one man's work to another's promise. Wealth was a boy refusing $500 because the exchange he wanted was bigger. Wealth was a man who sold a car and kept a town. Wealth was the sound a new roof made on a day that didn't try to snow. Wealth was PTA coffee that tasted awful and felt like home. Wealth, he had learned, was measured in lives changed, not dollars earned. He had said it at podiums and to himself. The line had become the grain of his days. When the stars came, Pastor Ellis said a prayer that didn't announce itself as one. People went home in twos and threes. Imani stood at the door and touched the frame with her fingertips. She taught the wall to remember one more thing. At the edge of the lot, Damien paused. Kadeem stood beside him, taller by an inch than he had been in January for reasons that were not only bone. Theo leaned on the van and sketched the outline of the building on the back of a receipt with a pencil that had been used to argue earlier that day. Zion fell asleep on a picnic blanket and woke smiling, which might have been the most expensive thing in the world, and also free. "Think we did it?" Kadeem asked. He didn't mean finished. He meant started. "Yeah," Damien said, and we're not done. We'll never be done." "Good," Kadeem said. "I wouldn't know what to do with finished." They walked away when the porch lights blinked the way Pine Hollow's porch lights blinked to say goodnight. The van ticked as metal cooled. The center's new roof kept its first perfect dark vigil. Somewhere down Juniper Lane, a house exhaled like a woman who has placed an old hammer in the right hands. And far away, in a place that had taught him to run without learning where, a boardroom sat around a table without a man who had learned to show up to different rooms. The stock held steady. The memos got written. The world did not notice the absence. Pine Hollow did. It noticed in small ways. Soup ladles and budget pencils and the way a man who used to live in the sky now knew when a three-point line was a little off-center. It measured the miracle not in dollars, but in how many kids would show up Monday because there was something in a building with their names on it that wanted them. When the lights clicked off inside, one stayed on at the plaque, not for vanity, so that anyone who arrived after hours and worried they had missed it could press their palm to the cool metal and read the line again, out loud, the way a town keeps a vow from evaporating into air. "True wealth is measured in lives changed." The sentence glowed. The town answered, each in its accent, each in its own time. And the roof, honest and new, sang along.